Alright, let's talk about 4 movies today. It was gonna be 5. It was gonna be How to Train Your Dragon was actually gonna be the start of this video before I saw it. And the thing about that is, I don't really feel much of a need to talk about How to Train Your Dragon, I guess, because number one, there is a video on this channel where I went through the whole animated trilogy, so we've essentially talked about it, because it is more or less, the same movie, and it hits, all the same beats, so it would feel like pretty much anything I said before about the original is pretty much the same thing. We kind of went through that with Lilo and Stitch just now, where it was like, oh yeah, it was, it's basically the movie on screen, but oh, the effects actually look really good, and the characters actually look really good, brought to the more, CGI life rather than the regular animation. But it's weird how they use the same jokes, and it's like, are we still supposed to laugh and have the same reactions to exactly all of it? And just the fact that I never had an emotional connection to it. And so, like, when I watch scenes like, when he's training the dragon, or when they go flying, or whatever, it's like, I know, like, I don't really have those feelings there that I know so many people do. And so it's like to basically just come here and kind of say, yeah, those scenes that, really mean so much to you just mean absolutely nothing to me. I feel completely emotionally hollow when I watch that movie. I just feel like that doesn't really add anything to the conversation. Like, there's no real reason to, like, make that, like, a whole 15-minute to 20-minute conversation. So, I'm just gonna leave it at that. I basically feel exactly about it the way I do about the original movie, where I never really took to it in that way that most people did, so I didn't really have much of an emotional reaction to it. It was just there to me, but I wouldn't want to taint, the love that everybody has by throwing in this pointless, oh, I didn't really get anything out of it sort of thing for 20 minutes straight. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave that at that, and we'll start at Ballerina, which is our John Wick spin-off, mainly a spin-off from what was introduced in the third John Wick, which I guess, I've been talking before about how much I loved the first movie, and I think the first movie is still, like, the top tier of the franchise, but I know as soon as it came out, a lot of people really took to that whole world-building thing and everything they were setting up as far as how it was set and how everything operated and who was running what and how large it expanded and all that. And it's like, the simplicity of the first movie is what really appealed to me, so while I've gotten something out of all the sequels since, more John Wick movies is never something I'm, like, begging for or, like, really highly anticipating. But I still usually, like, I did love the fourth movie. But it's, like, my particular ranking would be 1, 4, 2, 3. Because 3, I feel like, kind of squandered this amazing setup that it had and went in all these sort of directions that it kind of really didn't need to, and it just felt really bloated in a way that, weirdly enough, didn't feel as bloated as the fourth movie. But here, since we're spinning off from that third movie, and, like, Angelica Houston is back and all that stuff, I don't mind as far as the idea of Wick being in. I thought I was going to be like, this is going to be a spin-off, this is going to be, for this character, and it's going to kind of take us in maybe an interesting new direction or something, would be the point. So the question was, is it kind of shoehorned in that Wick is a character in the movie? Because I kept hearing it was supposed to take place between, like, 2 and 3, at least, like, the main core of it. But I've heard, like, conflicting reports on that, so I don't know where exactly it's set chronologically, but these aren't really movies that I revisit, like, a lot enough to, like, remember exactly where they are. But as far as this goes, I actually didn't mind his first 2 scenes. I was perfectly okay with that. It was when when he was dropped into the climax felt kind of unnecessary to me, and it kind of, like, since it feels like the whole point is to kind of, really show this new character, because we already have, like, the first half of Ballerina, when she has to, like, go through, we get, like, the whole exposition and all the backstory, and then she's thrown into something to show that, like, prove that she can do it and prove herself. And so, her going pretty much single-handedly the way Wick would into a climax feels like it would have been the way to go with this. Otherwise, what was all that entire first hour of the movie for? But, you know, whatever. Because the thing about it is that this is a movie that we've seen basically 1,000 times when it comes to that exposition and where the character comes from, and even like the ballerina setup specifically. Wasn't that pretty close to like Black Widow's backstory, if I remember correctly, in the Marvel universe? I don't really remember, but yeah, and another thing that was kind of we'll get to when the movie actually does eventually reach a point where it does take off. This isn't all like, you know, hate or bad things or anything, but I will say that I was also at a point towards the first half of this movie where it was like, I'm really over the manufactured coolness, like the neon lights and the slow-mo and the club music and all that. And all that just feels like it's basically telling us how to feel about how awesome this character is and how awesome this world and this franchise are, rather than just us feeling it naturally. It's like, yeah, we've been, you know, looking at this same aesthetic for these 5 movies now, so we kind of get that. But, and it's almost like a lack of comments, I guess you could say, and maybe you could chalk that up to Len Wiseman, who is obviously not new to action movies, or in some cases even the aesthetic, but is new to the franchise. So, but I have always found him to be a bit of an underrated director. Like Live Free or Die Hard is a lot, you know, cooler and badass than it gets credit for a lot of the time. And his Total Recall remake is... I haven't had a problem with the Total Recall remake as long as you see it as its own standalone movie and you're not thinking about Verhoeven's movie. I'm actually okay with the Total Recall remake as its own thing. So, but weirdly enough, I don't like the Underworld movies. So I have a very mixed place with Wiseman. But here, I do feel like there is a struggle in that first half, but then he really seems to find his footing in the second half, and then the movie does take off. It seems like it's around the time the Norman Reedus scene happens, is when it feels like it kind of kicks into gear, which is interesting, since Reedus is definitely underused here. Like, I was kind of surprised how little he was in it after it felt like his character coming into it's when it started to, like, really take off, but that's when I think De Armas finds her footing also, because I do have this sort of thing where I was holding back, where it's like, oh, I'm glad we're getting this, you know, John Wick spinoff, but can I just pretend that this is like the No Time to Die spinoff with Ana de Armas that we actually wanted? But this is, you know, yeah. So, yeah, once it kicks into gear and it really comes back to her wanting revenge on Gabriel Byrne, like I said, at the end of the day, even though the franchise is just expanding and expanding and expanding, I always like it the most when it's at its really simple roots. So it's like when the objective is pretty simple of Gabriel Byrne killed her father, so now she's going to kill him, and that's the objective. And then the action fills in the gaps, and that's really the action is really what we're here for. Like, the plot could be anything. Which is why the simpler, I think, may be the better, because it's really just here to connect the action scenes, and the art and the choreography that's put into those is the real star of this franchise. And so it's in these moments where I feel like it does finally kick in, to the point that it might overshadow how sort of rough the first half can be, because I saw this, like, the day after it came out, which is obviously, you know, we're a week or two out from that now. And so I was thinking, and it's like, if I had sat down and started talking about this movie right after I saw it, instead of like 2 weeks after the fact, I probably would have been much more forgiving and much more hyped up coming out of it, with that second half much more fresh. But now, after sitting on it, it's like it feels like we're kind of pushing through a lot in order to get to, like, the real meat of what this was, and how it shows that it kind of had that in itself the whole time. But, and I'm not even saying, like, movies have to, you know, get straight to the point or anything like that, and it's like, I'm not, like, an impatient viewer by any means, but it's like, we're 5 movies into this franchise, and this franchise is known for really one thing, which is the beauty of its action scenes, and the lack of cutting, and being able to see all the glorious action without it being chopped to pieces, and people look like they're, like, really taking real hits, and just everything feels like this almost dance of sorts. which with the, you know, ballerina concept makes sense, I suppose. But there's definitely a smoothness that's into play. And you could say that's the point, because at first she's, you know, new to everything, and then when she's seasoned is when the movie really picks up. But like I said, it's not like we haven't already seen this 1,000 times before. We know everything that's going to happen in the first half. We know what it's leading to, we know what the character's going to go through, and what point she's going to end up at. So, you could have really... Act 1 could have been significantly quicker than it was, so... that's kind of an issue, but like I said, it does sort of save itself in that second half, and becomes the movie we would hope it to be. And so that's pretty much where I stand with this. I still think it's very tacky, the branding title. Another thing that almost feels like a lack of confidence from the, not from the filmmakers, but from, like, you know, the higher-ups and the executive angle and the marketing angle, where, like, from the world of John Wick, whatever it is, just... well, frankly, just doesn't roll off the tongue, for starters. It's way too much of a mouthful, and it just really gives this corporate feel to the movie itself. Where it's like, hey, you want, you know, some more cool fight scenes, and you want more of what you love about this franchise. Also, we are selling something blatantly to you, and if you love this franchise and you're involved in it, we're also trying to bring in these people that are too fucking dumb to know what the movie is, and need John Wick in big letters at the top of it to tell you. So that's... there's things that are really sort of taking away from what could have made it stronger everywhere. But like I said, once we get to the core of that second half of it, then it's like, there's a lot that can be forgiven, and you can see what it was really capable of the whole time. So that's my mixed look on that. So now we can go into Materialists, a movie that I was really excited about because it is Celine Song's follow-up movie to Past Lives. And if you were here on the channel a couple of years ago, during our awards videos, I made it perfectly clear how much I loved Past Lives so much. I practically worshipped Past Lives a couple of years ago. And it actually was pretty recently that I rewatched it, and it's still, even outside of award season, actually it's probably better outside of award season hype. Which is great. So, and the idea that it was so, like, just honest and straightforward, and the three characters had, like, such a chemistry, and everybody was likable, everybody was sympathetic, and it's, like, the kind of romance movie that you'd have to, like, go back decades to find something that would make you feel that way. And Celine Song has really tapped back into this sort of old-fashioned, like, as far as, like, the romance movie as it was then, and how much more effective it seemed to be then, but still having this modernization to it, to where she's really brought the type of movie that worked really well in the past, and has finally made it work in a way that you would have thought was maybe long dead, and, like, maybe not even possible anymore. So, and the thing about it also is... the thing I tried to do right away going into this was make sure I was not setting the bar at Past Lives, because that would just have been unfair. It would have been like, alright, so you made Past Lives, now make something better. I don't know how people can go into movies like that and expect them to turn out what they're unfairly expecting, but the first thing I did was think to myself, like, don't expect Past Lives, just... like, it's her, I'm assuming it's going to have her stamp on it, and we'll see what else she's done and what new character she's bringing to us, and whatever happens, happens. So, but I was confident in her enough that I wasn't worried that Past Lives is going to be like a one-hit wonder thing or anything like that. And sure enough, I probably liked this about as much as I was hoping to. And what's interesting about it also is Past Lives is pretty straightforward, a drama. And so, and like, obviously it'll have light moments, but it's like a drama, and it's like a heart-shattering drama. So, with this one, it was marketed as, like, being a bit more upbeat, and when you see, like, you know, Chris Evans and Pedro Pascal, despite the fact that we know they're capable of more, but their maybe sort of recent and more mainstream output might make you think, oh, this is a very particular movie. I guess especially since Dakota Johnson is our main character. So... it might look like a very romantic comedy vibes, like very generic romantic comedy vibes. So I do know that like it kind of seemed like they were approaching the marketing in a way to say like, hey, this looks really light and fun, doesn't it? But also we kind of really want you to know that it's not a traditional romantic comedy, so please maintain your expectations if you're coming in for something like that. I actually don't know what, like, sort of regular moviegoers that maybe aren't familiar with Past Lives or Celine Song's style have felt when they come out of this. To my understanding, it has been pretty well liked, but I'm not sure like how people maybe expecting a more typical romantic comedy have felt coming out. I'm hoping it's all been positive. So what's interesting about this, for starters, is meeting Dakota Johnson's character and Lucy, I think her name was. And what's interesting about this character right away, and once again, is something that I would typically worry about in any other movie, but knowing it was in Celine Song's hands, I was confident that something would come of this. The idea that Lucy might not seem likable in how she's approaching like her, basically her entire character and her character's expectations of relationships and what they are and all that, where she's like, what makes it work, for starters, is that there is like an honesty. Like, it's very, she as a character and the writing are very upfront about who she is and how she views love and relationships, and how she looks at them basically practically, like from a very practical standpoint of like, well, if I'm gonna have this successful life, I need a successful person, I need a rich guy, and that should kind of be like where the base of the relationship is financial stability. And somebody who is like, perceived generally as good looking by typical standards. So that immediately can make you think like, oh, this person's like, really, this is our main character and she's this superficial, and you might already check out. But the thing about that is, like I said, number one, it's very upfront. Not only is it very upfront, watching her in the first few scenes and in the writing, it's literally in the title. So it's very upfront about where this character's coming from. But I feel like also at the beginning, we never get the vibe that she's incapable of like romance and love. Like they don't. It's not like they write that off for the character entirely right away, and it's one of those things where it's like, oh, we're gonna see her start to see the error of her thinking, and fall for somebody that's not maybe. I mean, like, we know the possibilities of where it could go, because if you've seen one romantic comedy, you've seen all of them. So to set it up to where at least I didn't get the vibe that it was like, oh, this is a character that's like really unlikable, that's going to change her ways and then become more likable as it goes. Because Celine Song doesn't make characters that are that one-dimensional. So it's going to become clear pretty quickly as it goes on that Lucy is a character that feels very much real and very much has more dimensions than just this. And also, not only just that, like, not to just ignore that or write it off, but like, the fact that the more time we spend with her, the more we might understand why she feels that way. And then we'll be able to kind of see it from her perspective, even if we are hoping that she starts to go another way. So, and the fact that she literally tells Pedro Pascal that she sees relationships as like a math equation, essentially. Like, where it just kind of all adds up that Pedro Pascal would be the perfect kind of guy for like any woman. And then another type of guy, say like her ex Chris Evans, who's like a waiter, and he's poor, and he like lives in an apartment, this really crammed apartment with a bunch of other roommates, most of which he seems to really struggle to get along with, and he's just really getting by as narrowly as possible, and who's just like on the total opposite end of the spectrum of the Pedro Pascal character. Who is, rich and seems to barely have everything going for him. And then, of course, now with that set up, we're going to have these very long scenes of dialogue between two characters with, like, these really human conversations that really explore these aspects of all these different angles and all these possibilities for, like, romance and relationships and all that. And like and choosing which direction your life is gonna go, and there's this, just like you would expect after her previous movie, there's this directness to it in these scenes of dialogue, and like nobody is like hinting around at everything. There's no like attempts at like tedious, you know, head games or anything like that, or mind games. Just everything is like sort of like characters just put everything out on the table, and then we see how they deal with it. And that's the appeal of this. And what I really love about this also is saying how it's not it's not a copy of Past Lives. It's basically a totally different movie from Past Lives. But if you have to make the comparison, what I really love about it is that you can see Past Lives in it while it's a totally different movie. When it's like the dialogue and the chemistry between the three characters and the openness, but even outside of that, like from a technical standpoint, like the lighting and the framing and all that, and it's like you can see a Celine song like signature, and you can see her voice. And I've talked many times before about how much I love that when a director this new, a director with like 2 movies, can like find a signature and a voice that you instantly recognize already. And it's like, 2 movies in, we're already going to be seeing, like, other filmmakers who are, like, Celine Song inspired. Like, we'll be seeing indie movies coming out about, you know, characters in really realistic romantic situations, and we'll be like, man, this really feels like a Celine Song. You can see, like, you know, influence of Celine Song in this movie. And it's like, to get that 2 movies in, to get that recognizable, while making 2 movies that feel quite different, but also absolutely through the same voice and eyes, that's really remarkable. I love that Celine Song is just absolutely not disappointing after that. So yeah, obviously I think Past Lives is, like, you know, a greater achievement, but this, like, in various other ways, like as an achievement, as a movie that has to follow a movie like Past Lives, and finding your signature and your voice this quickly in your career, there's still plenty that this accomplishes also. Like I said, I'm trying not to do the whole, oh, well, one's, you know, obviously better than the other, but still, it's just not about that. So, and talking about, another thing about Lucy and seeing her, and the way the writing handles this, and the way we see things play out, sometimes there's stuff that comes in from outside the 2 sort of relationships going on, where, there's a subplot that's going on also where she's essentially, like, she's a matchmaker. Like, she's like, you know, she's like Hitch in a way. Hitch without, like, you know, the quirkiness, I guess, or the unorthodox methods or whatever. So much more straightforward matchmaker. But a problem is thrown into this involving Zoe Winters, I think is the actress's name, and her being set up with, Past Lives fans love this, a voice cameo from John Magaro, who is definitely not playing the same kind of guy that he was in Past Lives. And the direction this goes is kind of the turning point for Lucy, where we kind of see her, and the way she reacts to this situation is when we kind of start to see Lucy in a new light. And I like the fact that that happened outside of, like, the romantic drama. Like, this whole other pretty dark problem that comes into the movie midway that she has to deal with, and seeing how she deals with that, and how that sort of makes an impact on her character, and sort of makes her rethink things, or kind of come to some new light or something. And that I felt like was really well done, and that's something that could have seemed like it was kind of like out of left field, because like I said, it's pretty dark. It kind of goes down a dark path there, compared to the rest of the movie. But the way it sort of tied in, and that's the point with her character in this sort of unexpected way, and her change, and we kind of see her evolve, I thought was a really good choice. And another way that kind of goes around doing what you would, like, typically expect, like all the typical beats you would expect when a character sort of has an arc and has a turnaround and all that. So I really like the inclusion of that also. And it was kind of risky in a good way, and it ends up paying off. And then when you look at the Chris Evans and Pedro Pascal characters, and I like that Pascal definitely has, like, the perfect charm for this role. He's one of those people where it's like, yes, he's in, like, everything now, like, to an insane degree. Like, I know, like, actors tend to do this, like, they do a few things and then they get famous and then they're, like, in everything. He's really kind of gone an extra level as far as, wow, he really is in just about everything. But what's interesting about him is there is such a charm to him, and he has such a presence, that I have yet to be tired of him, even as much as we're seeing him lately, which I'm usually like one of the first people that'll say like, okay, I think this person can slow down, this person needs a break and all that. But no, as every new Pedro Pascal project comes, I'm like, all right, I'm good with this. So like I'm not even, and I'm like I'm looking forward to Eddington. I'm really looking forward to it. So it's like I'm not really on the I'm sick of Pedro Pascal thing. So that's nice. And then Evans has something here where it's like not only do we have his character from the side he's coming from and how it's nice to see him as like this very human, multidimensional character after like, you know, not to like diss his Marvel run or anything after it, like obviously he was an amazing Captain America, but to really kind of get to see him do a part like this when I saw a lot of people starting to say like, oh, can he do anything apart from Captain America and the snarky guy? It's like, yeah, of course he can. He's had a career that goes back, I think, a lot farther than, or a lot more like diverse than people remember in like that sort of mid-2000s area. And then to see him here playing this character, but then also when he's interacting with Lucy and the way we can kind of see their history, and then before we see some of their history in flashback, but even before we see the flashbacks, it's like you can just sort of see their history in the way they interact. And I really love seeing that also. So, again, 3 main characters, 3 actors with great chemistry that tells the story in its own way. And it's, yeah, like I said, Celine Song really has a voice and a vision that's really coming through, and that's really exciting. So it'll be really exciting to see what she does now after she's got one like incredible movie and one very, very great follow-up, very good follow-up, and then whatever comes next. So let's go on to The Amateur. Yeah, I was really behind on this one, so I just kind of threw it in here. So this one is based on a novel, and that novel was already adapted into a movie in like the 80s, which I didn't see. I think it was Christopher Plummer's in it, and I think John Savage is playing the Rami Malek part. So I didn't know about either one of those, so I went into this like as it is, so I haven't seen that original movie or anything, so going into it, I just knew that it was basically the typical concept was it was kind of a revenge movie, and he's a guy that's, you know, not exactly the revenge fighting type. He's more of like a tech guy of sorts, and then he's going to get training so that he can get revenge after his wife was killed in an attack. That's what I knew the setup was, and that in itself was intriguing enough to me, especially with like Rami Malek taking a part like this, like Oscar winner Rami Malek, and what seems like a sort of typical revenge movie, but it's like these are still the kind of movies that appeal to me regardless, as simple as they may seem. So I was kind of really interested in checking this out. I don't know why it took me so long to get to it, but and the fact that Lawrence Fishburne is the one that's like training him and all that. So yeah, so we get the start, and it's the kind of start that you would expect. He's married to Rachel Brosnahan, and they have this almost sickeningly sweet marriage. They're just like madly, madly, madly in love with each other. And so naturally, we're setting up just how much he's going to snap when she's killed, and how desperate he's going to get to enact his own justice, his own brand of justice to this, and sort of change who he is as a human being in order to be able to do that. To get face to face with somebody and kill them, like to their face. And so it's the ways he kind of goes about that, and sometimes often around that, that tend to make the movie really interesting as it gets into the meat of it. But I was surprised when it started. There's opening credits, and I didn't realize how stacked the cast was. Like every name that came up was like, oh, I had no idea they were in this. Oh my god, I had no idea they were in this. So that was exciting, and then sure enough, like, right after the opening credits are done and we've seen all the names, John Bernthal appears, who was not listed. So it's like that kind of continued as it went on. And I think John Bernthal might have walked onto the wrong set, because he only has a couple of scenes, and to be honest, I saw The Accountant too, but I haven't, like, talked about it or reviewed it or anything, but I will say, this feels more like an accountant movie to me than The Accountant 2 did. This one doesn't have the stupid comedy in it, and this movie doesn't shy away from its action scenes. It doesn't say, oh, here's you know, we're building up and building up to an action scene. Oh, this is going to be really satisfying. And you do some stupid comedy bit and cut away and don't even show the action scene. That doesn't happen in this one. So, yeah. But, like, the aesthetic and, like, the vibe of it, and the way it approaches, like, the guy that is sort of unassuming and then comes into this and has, like, this sort of, you know, violent mindset that nobody really knows about that knows him, gave me, like, accountant vibes. And, like, where he comes from and where he ends up and what he's capable of. Kind of gave me, like, loose vibes of it. So, there's that. So, if you were like me and were very, like, unsatisfied with The Accountant 2, which, the movie has a lot of fans, but if you were like me in that sense, I feel like this kind of fills that hole of what that maybe could have been or could have felt like, for the most part. And it's like talking about Rami Malek being like the unassuming guy. I saw something recently where the director said, like, because he has, like, accessible awkwardness, I think was the phrasing, is why he wanted Rami Malek. And there's something very truthful about when he's talking to Holt McCallany, his superior, about what he wants to do and how he wants to, you know, get justice for his wife. And McCallany says, I don't think you could beat a nun in an arm wrestling match. And it's like, I think that's a good way to describe. And it's like, you know, we saw, like, No Time to Die, so we know that Rami Malek can be, like, you know, sinister and kind of intimidating in his own way. If not physically imposing, he can find other ways. And I like the idea of injecting those qualities into our protagonist in this. Like, there's even times as the movie goes on where it's like something will happen and it's like, wow, even though I've been watching the movie, even I'm kind of surprised that he was capable of that. And so that's a really fun feeling to have as it goes on and as it progresses, and he gets more and more sort of comfortable in the environment of the violent justice seeking, but finding his own ways to do it. When it gets a bit to where Fishburne and McCallany and the like think that he will fail or think that he won't be able to live up to his own expectations of what it would take for him to enact revenge in the way that he wants to. And seeing the way the character continues to surprise the characters that are doubting him throughout it is a really sort of fun arc to watch as it goes on. What's also interesting about these early training scenes with Fishburne is they're also the kind of thing where, like, you pretty much you're getting basically what you would expect. It's like, you know, training montages, and at first, like, he's embarrassing, but then there's other ways where he impresses Fishburne. And then it gets to a point to where you're like, okay, I feel like the training section of the movie is moving awfully fast. It's like, wow, we're kind of speed running through this. And then once it kind of starts to get to that point, you start to think that is when you realize that there's a bit more going on in regards to how they're going to approach things. And so the way they throw those little surprising moments in where it's like, it is a straightforward movie, and we have seen this kind of movie several times, but they kind of throw in these little things of, oh, okay, so I get this portion, but I didn't quite see that coming. So that's fun. So I like when they can kind of shake it up a little bit to where they're giving you what you expect it to be and what you probably want when you go into a movie like this, and still just throwing in these little unexpected moments that might sort of keep you alert. So I was really enjoying that as it went. And we also get little moments thrown in, like things that have this sort of realism to them, but are also kind of thrown in for, like, light touches, like when he has to pick a lock to get into a room, and he literally just uses a YouTube tutorial. And I'm pretty positive we've had that scene in at least a couple of movies. But I feel like it's still, like I said, it's actually practical, that it makes sense that he would have to do that in order to accomplish these smaller things that he hasn't been trained in. The fact that you can just get, you know, trained instantly by following a tutorial online. And like I said, the light touch of it where, like, it's going on, the video is basically narrating as he's doing it, and then when we hear the lock unlock, you, like, hear the voice on the video say, like, and there you have it. So those are fun little touches, even if it's something we've probably seen before. But yeah, so there is a lot of action, and once again, it is an action movie, so that is what you want. There were times where I was starting to fear that it might be one of those movies that has so much action that it starts to kind of dull itself. Like, by the time we're, like, getting towards the end of Act 2, and we've had, like, our 7th big action scene, and it's like you might kind of start to check out a little bit. The action is still pretty effective and well choreographed, and there's even a moment in one of those really later action scenes in this chase scene where he does genuinely seem, like, trapped. Like, there is a genuine moment where you're like, this could be, like, if this were any other character, I feel like this would be it. I genuinely want to know how he's going to get out of this. Because there's a moment where it feels, like, genuinely dire. And so to kind of see him work his way out of that is also, it kind of brings that back just when you think, like, your senses are going to get numb to all the action that's going on. So I appreciated that. It kind of reminded me, the movie itself, like, even in concept and the action scenes in general, kind of started to remind me of the Rhythm section, the Blake Lively Jude Law movie, which I've talked about this a couple of times before, where I wasn't really kind to that movie when it first came out back in, like, 2020, but it's, like, grown in my mind, and, like, I think I respect it more than I thought I did, and so this kind of called me back to that, but I'm definitely feeling it more in the moment than I did with that one, where it kind of grew in my mind. It's like, I feel like this is kind of in that same vein also. So another thing that really worked about this was, just as we're pulling into the third act, when things might feel like they're running out of gas, or when we might be reaching a certain point where it's like, all right, I think we can go home pretty soon, so let's see how you wrap this up if you do it in a very satisfying way. And that's when Michael Stuhlbarg appears. He was there earlier, but he was, like, obscured enough to where I couldn't really... I'd forgotten that he was one of the names in the credits because there were so many names. But then when it's, like, shown that he's who Malik has been pursuing this whole time. And then there's a scene here that plays out, which I'm not going to, like, give away the ending or anything like that, but I will just say I loved the way this scene was treated, where it's been a very action-packed, very violent movie up to this point, and it's been very set up that, Malik wants his revenge, and he's been training to, go completely outside of himself as a person and basically become a killer in order to get to this place. This very revenge-fueled place. And the way this scene plays out with dialogue between them was this really unexpected surprise. And the way that Stuhlbarg was able to do, like, we get, like, the real coldness in him as the person that did what he's guilty of. But he's also got that Stuhlbarg warmth in him, where no matter how bad or sleazy or unlikable a character Michael Stuhlbarg can play, he can pull that out at, like, a moment's notice. That, like, the Call Me By Your Name warmth that we saw at the end of that movie. There's always something like that kind of there to sort of soften the potential terror he's possible of bringing also. And so when they decide to sit down and have, like, a dialogue about everything that's happened in the movie up to this point, was really, in its own way, in this really satisfying way. He's also wearing, like, this sweater of sorts that really fit that vibe of sitting down and having a human conversation about everything that's happened. But you can still feel the tensity between the two of them and how it feels like it's bubbling to something, but we're not sure how, at this point, this climax is gonna break out. And I was really happy with how satisfying the conclusion is. Like, the whole conclusion of the movie up to the end is really satisfying. And so that really, like, any moments that maybe fell short in this movie, or maybe it feels a tad too long, or, like I said, maybe the action's a bit numbing after a while, the satisfaction of this ending sort of covers any territory that might have fallen short. So I was really happy with this movie overall. Like, surprisingly so. Like, I thought I'd go in and be like, oh, this is fun, and I like this genre, so yeah, this is my kind of thing. So I was surprised how good I thought it really was. So I was really happy with that. I will say there was one thing, and this will be the last thing I say, and maybe it's a tad spoilery depending on what you consider spoilery. But there was something that was distracting me for most of the movie, and that was the fact that Rachel Brosnahan was playing his wife, and she's second in the credits, and for some reason, the movie refuses to show her death, like, outright. So the whole movie, I don't know if this was the point, maybe this was kind of the point, I don't know. But the whole movie, I'm just thinking, somehow she's alive and she's involved, and you guys are not being subtle about it at all. Like, you guys are horrible at hiding this. Because it's like, why hire somebody as acclaimed as Rachel Brosnahan is at this point? And, you know, she's second in the credits, and she's barely going to be in this if that's not the case, if there's not some sort of twist here. And it's like, they throw in, like, little flashbacks. And it's like, okay, so either you are just finding ways to put her in the movie to justify hiring her, somebody of her stature, for this tiny role, or there's a twist here. And I was really surprised that there's no Brosnahan-based twist. She is just killed. They just would not... I guess they're doing it as like a sensitivity thing to the character, maybe, because there is a moment where Malik is about to watch her get killed, and then he stops because he can't bring himself to see it. And I just find it interesting that we as the audience never saw it, that I remember. So I just really kept thinking, like, that's the direction they're going. And I kept thinking that the whole time. And I was trying to think the whole time of how it would circle back around to that. And that's just not what's going on. So, like I said, that may have been on purpose. And if so, that's a skillful way to throw us off. So, there is that. But yeah, I found that distracting, but like I said, if that's what they were going for, then they accomplished that, and they ended up not doing the obvious thing, so that's always commendable. So, let's end on Dangerous Animals. Talking again about movies, they're like, oh, that's a fun concept, I'm sure that'll be fun, and then it ends up coming out to quite the acclaim, and being a lot better than I think a lot of people are expecting. So, first of all, what's interesting is I didn't know this was a Shudder movie until it started, and we saw the logo. So I probably would have gone in with higher expectations than I had I known that. Because even though Shudder has made shit, sure, you know, they all have, Shudder makes a lot of really, really good shit, too. So, and I think they have set a bar to where it's like, more often than not, you can set your expectations pretty decently when you see their logo. So, it's also from Sean Byrne, the director who did The Loved Ones and The Devil's Candy. Another thing I didn't know at first until, like, right when I was going into it. And so that, as far as those go, without, you know, venturing off into talking about those movies, he is a director that's got this really sort of interesting and unique vision and is willing to go to these very brutal, pushing the envelope, if you want to put it lightly, places, and will not shy away from things. So all of this was just adding up to the excitement for what this could potentially be. So, to talk about the opening, when I really started to take to this movie pretty quickly, because here's the thing, here's what's great, is when you're someone like me that avoids like all the marketing and the trailers and the TV spots and all that stuff, is I didn't know anything about this. I knew Jai Courtney was in it, and I knew there were sharks in it. And I assumed it was going to be a shark movie, where we have a protagonist and we have the sharks. And that's all I knew, and that's all I assumed. So, when the movie opens, but before I say this, I'm assuming everybody actually knows the real concept, as I say this. So if you want to have the surprise that I did, then you can stop here. This is the opening scene. So, it's Jai Courtney and this couple they have like, I don't know if they're like, it's an anniversary or something. It's an event for them, and they're going to go swim with sharks. And that's his whole deal, is he's in charge of that, and he sets that up, and he gives them all the safety precautions, oversees it, does that whole thing. That's his job. And so, I'm watching this opening scene, and I'm like, okay, these two people, are they going to be main characters? Or is this an opening kill situation? And this is gonna go horribly wrong, they're gonna get killed by the sharks. Or survive an attack and be, like, protagonists with Jai Courtney. That's what I'm thinking when I go in. So, the whole scene plays out, and I'm waiting to see what's gonna happen, And swimming with the sharks goes fine, goes as well as it could. And then Jai Courtney congratulates them, tells them they did a great job or whatever. And then Jai Courtney proceeds to stab this guy in the throat and throw him to the sharks and imply that he is kidnapping the woman. And that's what the movie is. He is a serial killer who feeds his victims to the sharks and kidnaps the women and holds them hostage. And then kind of does this sacrificial feeding of the sharks to them while he records it and keeps locks of their hair attached to the VHSs that he's used to record them, that he now has a small library of. Just completely off the map of what I thought this was, and I fucking love when that happens. As soon as he stabbed the guy in the throat, it was already like, oh, that's what this movie is. Okay. And I became very excited, and the movie became what I had hoped it would be after that moment. So, that right away was exciting. That's why it really pays to go into things as blindly as possible. So, another great thing about this is that Jai Courtney seems to be having so much fun in this role with this character, the more over the top it is. And it's not even like, because sometimes it can get maybe a bit cringy or over the top when actors are playing characters that are like super, super out of their minds. But then there's cases like this where it works and you can see the actor having the greatest time, and without it feeling like the movie's trying too hard, you as an audience member can say yourself without the movie telling you, this guy's fucking nuts. And I love that. So, and what I love about it too with his performance is he as far as his career went, as far as mainstream roles, it did start off on shaky ground, like A Good Day to Die Hard and stuff like that, and people are like, oh my god, who is this extremely wooden, no personality, charisma black hole, like, who is this person that's gonna just do a couple roles here and there and then probably vanish into thin air? But it turns out that he's one of those actors that was basically being pushed out by Hollywood in roles that I don't think really suited him. I liked him as, like, the henchman in Jack Reacher. But then it became clear it's like, oh, he's just getting, like, these really bland parts. And that's, like, this sort of, like, Hollywood machine thing going on. So when you take him out of that and you give him roles that really give him the room to do this kind of stuff. Like, another thing that, regardless of how people felt about, like, Ayer's Suicide Squad, a lot of people came out of that going, man, Captain Boomerang was really one of the MVPs of that movie. And then when James Gunn killed him off right away, people were so disappointed. So he's really, like, started to build this new place that A Good Day to Die Hard kind of set him up as something else. But now he's found this place as, like, this really fun, adventurous actor that's got, like, all this charisma and all this presence and this sort of wonderful insanity going on. That's very, like, attracting when you see it on screen. Very magnetic. So, and what I love about what he has with this character is, given what he does, the whole being the swimming with sharks guy, like, it makes enough sense that he might seem a little off. Like, if he was, you'd think, like, oh, this guy is rather eccentric, but that makes sense. So there's just enough charm in there that it hides exactly how sinister and insane this guy is, and it gives you just enough to be like, oh, he might be a little off, but he seems nice enough. And then when we see what's underneath, when he has, like, a full, like, Buffalo Bill dance moment, it all becomes clear in this really fun way. And I also love that there's not a lot of motive. It's a movie that's not weighed down by stuff like that. Like, we get, like, there's, like, news snippets and stuff around where we kind of get, like, the gist of, like, some event that happened in the past that might have maybe, triggered some kind of insanity in him and brought him to this point. But like I said, they don't really weigh us down with that. And they don't do that with the other main character either. The hostage that he takes that kind of becomes, like, when it becomes, like, hostage versus captor and becomes that kind of movie. A lot of it, there's not a lot of, like, exposition weighing it down. Like, there is, like when we're first introduced to her character and she meets the guy and all that, it is, like, that's something we probably could have sped through a little more than we do. But it does get us to this point where we kind of get into this 10 Cloverfield Lane territory where he takes the hostage. Kind of like Split also, where it's like we have seen, the captor hostage movie, and then like one trying to outsmart the other, and the other always having, something else up their sleeve, and this kind of game of wits that goes on. It's something that we've seen before, but here it has, like I was talking about Sean Byrne as a director, and the places he's willing to go. Where the movie does have several, like, disturbing moments in it. Yeah, it's, he's feeding to the sharks and all that stuff, and as it reveals, like, what it is exactly he's doing is disturbing in itself, but we also get this imagery, some imagery that's, like, I don't know how long it's going to take me to shake it off, but I certainly haven't shaken it off yet. Like, there's one shot that it lingers on for quite some time, where we have seen somebody become a victim to the sharks, and then we see what's left of them just, like, bobbing in the water, surrounded by darkness, and it just lingers there enough for you to take it in, and just really show, like, how somebody can be this living, breathing being with a personality and a life and a past and just everything, and then just as, like, leftover shark food that they didn't even bother to finish, just floating lifelessly. And it's moments like that that really give it this other layer of feeling than just being something that feels like this typical hostage versus captor movie that it could have been. And just a general brutality. Like, it's one of those things where, like, anytime somebody gets hit or something, it feels, like, really heavy, and you can, like, and it sounds painful and all that, and, like, you can feel it. And stuff like that, like, those feelings where it might seem like, in some cases, it might be too much. I feel like, especially in this genre, it's something that feels like that's kind of, like, that's what kind of the point of the genre is to bring that out, because when I say, like, the movie has shock value, for instance, I like the fact that it's, like, brutal and disturbing, but it never really feels like it's overdoing it. It feels like it's at that level of where it's shocking and has shock value, but it's not seeking further shock value than you would want as somebody that's, like, a fan of the genre or something, or somebody that's, like, here to be, like, disturbed and feel like it's kind of hard-hitting when those moments happen. And so I like the fact that it didn't feel like it was, like, overexerting itself to punish the audience. It really feels like it's here to give the audience that would see a movie like this what they want and what they would expect and what they'd hope for, and maybe going past those expectations in a good way. So, that on top of the fact also that it seems like there's times where it feels like it's very close to almost being too paper thin, which is coming from me, somebody that loves, simplicity when it's done well, especially in this type of genre. But with the direction and the performances and the fact that we have characters that are intriguing, but they're not, like, they're characters that aren't over-explained, like, their backgrounds and motives and stuff like that aren't over-explained. That's, in keeping intrigue with that, that's something that really keeps it afloat when it is more or less, afloat, no pun intended, obviously. When it might seem like it's almost, when it almost seems like it could have been an 80-minute movie instead of a 90-minute movie. But overall, at the end of it, I don't really feel like it's, like, too long or anything like that, or too, like, stretched out, so, as far as, like, its premise goes. So, yeah, this is another thing where I'm really happy with, and something else I'm really glad to see, like, acclaim for as it's grown, so, that's how I feel about these. So, for the most part, a pretty good group. So, I think the next thing is we're gonna go into, a few, like, straight-to-streaming movies like, Mountain Head and Deep Cover and Echo Valley, and I think it might be those three just in a video by themselves, and then we'll go on to back to the bigger releases and see where we're at as far as catching up, and, like, 28 years later is here now, and some of the stuff we've missed still, and getting all that sorted out. So until the next thing, I think that's it.